So, Dave, you spent a lot of time in Brazil in the run up to the World Cup and the run up to the Olympic Games reporting on the costs of staging these events because we see the dollar signs, but most of us, Dave, we have not seen $1 billion. We don't know what $1 billion look like. So, the dollar figures are pretty abstract to us. But can you tell us what some of the costs, like the hidden costs, the actual costs of staging these games are?
What I saw was a terrible human cost that came with the Olympics. And I'm talking more than anything else about human displacement and hyper-militarization and what that does to a country. In terms of human displacement, I visited numerous communities. They're known as favelas, which oftentimes people translate into slums, but people who live in favelas are actually quite insulted by that translation. What they are communities that people really built up from scratch. And when the Olympics and World Cup came, many of them were destroyed. And they were destroyed for a very simple reason. And this is going to be very familiar to a Canadian audience, and that's real estate. Not just the real estate to build Olympic stadiums, although they needed that, but also to build different kinds of housing that people who live in favelas could not hope to afford. So they're pushed further and further and further to the margins in these situations. And I don't think we talk about the social cost of displacement nearly enough, which, by the way, I also saw when I visited Tokyo before the pandemic in 2019. I met elderly people in Tokyo who were displaced for the 2020 Olympics, who had also been displaced for the 1964 Olympics. Like, that means twice in their lives over the course of roughly 60 years, they had been displaced by the Olympic Games in a supposedly modern progressive city that is Tokyo.
Hypermilitarization, gentrification, plus like a lot of the monetary benefits flowing towards a group of people that don't live in the city, right? Like the Olympics bounce from city to city to city. So what makes hosting the Olympic Games worth it for a given city? Like, why, if I am Toronto, if I am Calgary, if I'm Montreal, why would I bid on this given that so many of the benefits don't actually stay here?
People do get excited about the Olympic Games. I mean, it's a way to rally people around the flag and rally people around patriotism. One of the worries, though, and you ask about why places would want the Olympic Games or the World Cup, is that one of the worries is that it also builds prestige for authoritarian nations that bid on these games. So they are very important for people at the highest reaches of power to be able to compete with other countries on earth as a tourist destination, as a legitimate actor in world politics. I mean, Brazil saw hosting, and they said this openly, hosting the World Cup and the Olympics as being a toboggan ride for them getting on the UN Security Council and being in that rare air. Saudi Arabia wants to host the World Cup and the Olympics in the 2030s, partly as a point of legitimization for a country that is hyper authoritarian and tortures people that they perceive to be dissidents. So there's a power to hosting the Olympics in the corridors of power. But we should really question about whether regular people benefit from the fact that their leaders are able to then announce themselves on a global stage in a way that they otherwise would not be able to.
Now, you describe the Olympics as a neoliberal Trojan horse. I can't say that reflects a positive opinion of the Olympics. Well, yet, go ahead.
Yet, I'm so glad you're saying this, Morgan, because I am also, like yourself, a track and field obsessive.
Yes.
I love fencing. I do. And I love even the luge. Hell, yep. I'm an American who loves curling, for goodness sakes.
I mean, Rugby sevens, all kinds of sports you never really see anyplace else.
Yeah, and so the Olympics provides this one space where these art forms, and that's what I consider these sports art forms that have been around for millennia, like who can run the fastest? I love that. Who can pick up the most weight? You know, these things that have been around forever, when are they ever highlighted, if not at the Olympics? And so I want there to be a stable, sustainable, just Olympic movement, but we are not there. So while I want to say we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, as it were, we do need to figure out a way to dry off the baby and dump the bathwater down the drain.
And so if it were up to you, like what guidelines and guardrails would we have in terms of where the Olympics should go?
I mean, I do think rotating it through different spots throughout the world in a way where you have 4 or 5 stable locales that will always be used, and not this bidding process, which is not only ridiculously corrupt, I mean, ridiculously corrupt, but it also tends to produce the kind of neoliberal development Trojan horse politics, which I think we need to be very wary of. And a lot of that comes out of this frenetic bidding process to prove to the IOC that you are the country that can have the most dynamic, modern, frankly, just spectacle oriented Olympic Games. And I think if you had stable locales, we would get away from that model of both corruption and profound overspending.
Perfect. And before we leave, Dave, you've laid out sort of a vision for what the Olympics could be. You've also said it's not likely that it happens. But what do you think it would take to push us further in that direction?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think it would take more countries adopting the model that we've seen, and frankly, many countries over the last 20 years, which is insisting that their country do not host the Olympic Games. Because when your country is saying you don't want the Olympics, you're actually doing that in solidarity with other countries saying the same thing, with the hopes that it will be an international outcry to say, we want the sports, but we don't want the Olympics the way they are currently constituted.
Perfect, Dave. We're going to let you get to the ballpark in Baltimore because I understand it's a big week there. But thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Morgan.
All right, take care.